There comes a moment in life when you realize that love, for all its intensity and warmth, cannot carry everything. You've poured your heart into someone, believed in the promises, held on to hope, and still something feels hollow. It's not the absence of care or affection, but a quiet recognition that feelings alone cannot sustain a bond. Perhaps the conversations have grown sparse, trust has been tested, or the paths you walk side by side have begun to diverge. The heart aches not from a lack of love, but from the knowledge that love by itself cannot fix what needs more commitment, understanding, compatibility, or shared purpose. It is a painful, tender awakening, the kind that forces you to confront reality, to question, and to reflect. And in that space between desire and truth, we are called to see clearly, to listen to ourselves, and to find courage. Acknowledging the truth is one of the most difficult and courageous acts in love. It is the quiet realization that, despite all the passion, care, and devotion poured into a relationship, love alone cannot sustain it. This truth is rarely sudden or dramatic. It often comes as a series of small, quiet moments, a missed conversation, a growing distance, and unspoken frustration that accumulate until they become undeniable. To recognize this is not a failure or a moral shortcoming. It is an act of honesty with oneself, a willingness to see the relationship not through the lens of hope or desire, but through the reality of its dynamics. Love, while beautiful and transformative, does not automatically resolve conflict, mend repeated misunderstandings, or align two lives perfectly. Acknowledging the truth is about facing these realities without illusion, without clinging to what we wish could be rather than what is. This process begins with self-reflection. It requires stepping back from the emotions, the memories, and the intensity of attachment to examine the situation clearly. You ask yourself the difficult questions: are our values aligned? Are our needs being met? Do we communicate in ways that nurture understanding rather than conflict? Are we both willing and able to grow together, or are we moving in separate directions? These questions are not intended to assign blame, but to illuminate the conditions of the relationship honestly. Answering them requires courage because it means confronting the possibility that love, however deeply felt, may not be sufficient to sustain the connection. Acknowledging the truth also involves naming the emotions that accompany it. There is sorrow, yes, but also relief, clarity, and sometimes even a quiet sense of liberation. Denial prolongs suffering and fosters illusions, making it harder to navigate the next steps with integrity. By contrast, naming reality allows you to act consciously rather than react out of fear or attachment. It enables a clarity that transforms despair into understanding and confusion into decision. This clarity does not erase love or diminish its significance. It simply situates it within the boundaries of reality, recognizing that affection alone cannot bridge gaps in understanding, trust, or shared vision. Honesty with oneself often meets resistance. There may be fear of judgment, guilt, or the weight of disappointment. Society often romanticizes love as the ultimate solution, implying that if you truly care, it should be enough. But life is more complex. Acknowledging the truth means rejecting these myths and confronting the nuanced reality. Love can be deep, real, and enduring, and yet insufficient if other essential elements are absent. It means accepting that attachment, history, and desire do not automatically guarantee a sustainable partnership. Facing this truth is a form of strength, a conscious choice to honor reality rather than cling blindly to sentiment. This recognition also fosters responsibility. When we see clearly that love is not enough, we gain the power to make deliberate choices. We can decide to address the gaps, seek solutions, and engage in the work necessary to align values, communication, and effort. Or, if reconciliation is impossible, we can recognize the dignity in stepping away. Acknowledging the truth empowers action. It transforms helplessness into agency. It reminds us that love is meaningful, but it must be part of a broader framework of mutual understanding, shared purpose, and commitment. Without these, love alone cannot carry the weight of unmet needs or unresolved conflicts. Acknowledging the truth is also an act of self-respect. It requires honoring your own needs, boundaries, and aspirations, even when it challenges the comfort of remaining in a familiar or emotionally intense situation. It means valuing clarity over illusion, growth over stagnation, and integrity over denial. The process is rarely painless, but it allows the heart to see clearly, the mind to act wisely, and the spirit to navigate heartbreak with dignity. Love is not negated by this acknowledgement, it is reframed. It becomes a teacher illuminating what matters most, what is possible, and what is beyond repair. In essence, acknowledging the truth is the foundation upon which all other actions, whether repair, compromise, or letting go, are built. It is the quiet courage to see life as it is, not as we wish it to be. It is the honesty that allows for meaningful reflection, responsible decision making, and ultimately, the possibility of peace. To acknowledge that love is not enough is not to diminish love. It is to honor both love and oneself with clarity, courage, and compassion. Understanding limitations is one of the hardest truths to confront when love is no longer enough. Love feels infinite, as if it could overcome any obstacle, heal any wound, and reconcile any difference. Yet the reality of relationships is more intricate, more fragile, and far more demanding than passion alone can sustain. Love can be intense, devoted, and enduring, but it cannot replace effort, communication, compatibility, or shared vision. Recognizing this does not diminish love. It places it within the framework of reality. It acknowledges that love is a necessary ingredient in a relationship, but it is not sufficient on its own. Relationships are ecosystems of mutual understanding, shared responsibility, and alignment of values, and when any of these components are missing, love alone cannot maintain the structure. Understanding limitations is about seeing these dynamics clearly and accepting the truth with courage. The first step in this understanding is observing the patterns that repeat in the relationship. Often, difficulties surface not because love has disappeared, but because foundational elements trust, honesty, respect, communication are compromised or neglected. Perhaps arguments recur around the same topics. Emotions are frequently misunderstood, or one partner consistently sacrifices their needs while the other remains unaware. Love, however deep, does not automatically correct these imbalances. Recognizing this is difficult because love encourages hope, forgiveness, and perseverance, sometimes beyond the point of practicality. Seeing limitations requires removing the lens of emotional attachment for a moment and assessing the relationship in terms of functionality, sustainability, and mutual fulfillment. It is a sober, honest appraisal that does not diminish the affection felt, but reveals that devotion cannot compensate for gaps that threaten the health of the bond. Understanding limitations also involves acknowledging personal and relational boundaries. Every individual brings unique needs, expectations, and capacities to a relationship. No matter how much love exists, if these aspects are incompatible, friction and dissatisfaction will persist. Perhaps one person desires independence while the other craves closeness. Perhaps one is ready for long-term commitment while the other is hesitant or uncertain. Love alone cannot reconcile these differences. Recognizing this limitation requires maturity. It asks you to see that compatibility, shared values, and aligned goals are essential to sustaining a connection. It is not about failure or inadequacy. It is about understanding that relationships are multifaceted and that emotional intensity cannot replace structural and practical harmony. Another aspect of understanding limitations is accepting that external factors can influence the viability of love. Life circumstances, career paths, family obligations, health challenges, and personal growth trajectories can create pressures that love cannot resolve on its own. Love may inspire patience, forgiveness, and support, but it cannot always bridge logistical, emotional, or personal divergences that shape the lived reality of two people. Recognizing these limitations is not pessimistic, it is realistic. It allows both partners to consider whether the relationship can endure these pressures without sacrificing well-being or personal integrity. To love someone deeply but understand that the relationship may still be unsustainable is a paradox that demands courage, honesty, and self-awareness. Understanding limitations also requires honesty with oneself about personal needs and boundaries. Love can blind us to unmet needs or prompt us to tolerate behaviors that compromise our well-being. It can encourage sacrifice beyond reason and make us believe that devotion alone is proof of compatibility. Recognizing the limits of love entails asking hard questions. Are my emotional needs being met? Am I growing within this relationship, or am I compromising myself for the sake of affection? Can we realistically meet each other's needs, or does love merely create a comforting illusion that conceals deeper incompatibilities? Answering these questions with clarity is crucial to understanding whether love alone can sustain a healthy, balanced connection. Finally, understanding limitations is a practice of humility. It reminds us that relationships are not solely about feelings, but about the interplay of effort, respect, compatibility, and mutual growth. Love may inspire hope and devotion, but it cannot erase structural challenges, conflicting values, or unhealed personal wounds. Recognizing this allows us to make conscious, informed decisions about how to proceed, whether that means committing to the difficult work of building alignment or accepting that, despite the depth of affection, the relationship may no longer be sustainable. Understanding limitations does not diminish love. It honors it by placing it within a realistic framework, giving both partners clarity, agency, and the possibility of authentic growth, whether together or apart. Emotional awareness is one of the most essential yet often overlooked components of navigating a relationship where love is no longer enough. It is the ability to observe, understand, and acknowledge your own feelings with clarity, rather than being swept away by them or suppressing them in favor of hope, loyalty, or habit. When love begins to feel insufficient, emotions can become a storm. Frustration, sadness, confusion, and even guilt all swirl together, making it difficult to see the situation clearly. Emotional awareness allows you to step back and recognize what you are actually experiencing, to give each feeling a name, and to understand what it signals about the health of the relationship. Without this awareness, it is easy to mistake intensity for depth, pain for meaning, or longing for compatibility. The first aspect of emotional awareness is noticing the subtle signals of discontent. Often, dissatisfaction does not arrive as a sudden, dramatic revelation. It creeps in quietly in sighs, pauses, or moments of withdrawal. You may feel a persistent emptiness after conversations, a recurring tension that never seems to resolve, or a quiet longing for connection that cannot be met. These feelings are not trivial. They are indicators of a deeper mismatch between what you need and what the relationship provides. By paying attention to them, you allow yourself to confront the reality of your situation rather than ignoring it in the hope that love alone will make things right. Emotional awareness is the act of listening to yourself honestly, without judgment, and allowing your feelings to guide you toward clarity. Another crucial aspect of emotional awareness is identifying patterns in your emotional responses. Perhaps you notice that certain topics spark defensiveness or frustration, or that moments of intimacy are tinged with sadness rather than joy. Recognizing these patterns can reveal recurring problems that love cannot resolve on its own. It allows you to distinguish between temporary difficulties and structural incompatibilities. Emotional awareness teaches you that feeling deeply does not necessarily mean the relationship is thriving. It can also indicate persistent unmet needs, unspoken tensions, or fundamental misalignments. By tracking your emotional experiences, you create a map of the relationship's health, providing insight into whether love is a sustaining force or a comforting illusion. Emotional awareness also involves understanding the interplay between your emotions and your actions. Often, when feelings of disconnection arise, we respond reflexively through withdrawal, argument, or overcompensation without fully considering what these behaviors reveal. Awareness allows you to pause, examine your emotional triggers, and understand why certain reactions occur. It creates space for intentional action rather than reactive patterns. For example, recognizing that anger often stems from repeated unmet expectations rather than a lack of affection enables you to communicate more clearly, set boundaries, or make difficult decisions with insight rather than impulse. Emotional awareness transforms emotion from a chaotic force into a source of information and guidance. Self-compassion is closely linked to emotional awareness. As you confront the realization that love may no longer be sufficient, it is natural to feel guilt, shame, or failure. Emotional awareness allows you to hold these feelings without being consumed by them, acknowledging that your needs, desires, and limits are valid. It encourages you to differentiate between emotions tied to attachment and those tied to genuine insight about the relationship's health. This discernment prevents you from making choices based solely on fear, obligation, or longing, and instead fosters decisions grounded in clarity and authenticity. Emotional awareness is not about suppressing emotion, it is about honoring it, understanding it, and letting it illuminate the truth of the situation. Finally, emotional awareness provides the foundation for communication. Once you understand your feelings, you can articulate them to yourself and, if appropriate, to your partner. This clarity makes conversations less reactive and more constructive, focusing on needs, boundaries, and realities rather than resentment, blame, or confusion. It also allows you to accept your own experience rather than relying solely on external validation or hoping love will compensate for unaddressed emotional truths. By cultivating awareness of your emotions, you gain insight into your true desires, the limitations of the relationship, and the steps needed to act with integrity, whether that involves repair, compromise, or letting go. In essence, emotional awareness is the compass that guides you through the turbulence of a love that is no longer enough. It allows you to see clearly, feel honestly, and act responsibly. It transforms confusion into understanding, intensity into insight, and attachment into informed choice, giving your heart the clarity it needs to navigate one of life's most difficult realizations. The role of growth in relationships is often invisible until it becomes undeniable. Love can be deep, passionate, and enduring, yet if growth paths diverge, love alone is insufficient to sustain the connection. Growth is not simply about change for the sake of change, nor is it a measure of success or failure. It is the ongoing evolution of two individuals who continue to learn, adapt, and expand within the context of their shared life. When partners grow together, the relationship can weather challenges, adapt to shifting circumstances, and deepen over time. When growth becomes misaligned, when one person evolves in a way the other cannot meet or comprehend, love may persist, but the foundation that sustains intimacy, understanding, and compatibility begins to erode. Recognizing the role of growth requires both honesty and courage. Understanding growth in this context begins with self-awareness. Each individual carries desires, ambitions, values, and priorities that are constantly evolving. Sometimes these changes are subtle, a shift in career focus, a new interest, or a refined understanding of personal boundaries. Other times, growth manifests more dramatically, such as a reevaluation of life goals or the emergence of new beliefs and perspectives. Growth is natural and necessary for human fulfillment, but in a relationship, it requires both partners to remain aligned in terms of direction, pace, and mutual understanding. When growth trajectories diverge, love alone cannot reconcile the tension between personal evolution and shared life. Recognizing this requires a willingness to examine not only your own development, but also the ways in which it intersects or fails to intersect with your partner's path. A critical part of understanding growth in relationships is acknowledging that it can create friction. As individuals evolve, their needs, expectations, and priorities may shift. What once felt like natural alignment may now feel strained or constricting. Perhaps one partner seeks independence while the other desires closeness, or one pursues a new direction in life that the other cannot support or share. Love cannot erase these conflicts, nor can it guarantee compromise without effort and understanding. Growth is not just an internal process, it shapes interactions, communication patterns, and shared experiences. When personal growth is unacknowledged or unsupported within a relationship, even the deepest love can feel insufficient to sustain connection. Recognizing the divergence of growth also involves honesty about the limits of compromise. Relationships require adaptation, but growth cannot be ignored or suppressed for the sake of maintaining harmony. Suppression of personal development can lead to resentment, stagnation, and a quiet erosion of identity. Love that asks one or both partners to stop evolving is not truly supportive, it is confining. Understanding the role of growth means appreciating that healthy relationships require space for individual evolution, while simultaneously nurturing shared alignment. When this balance is lost, love may remain, but it alone cannot prevent the widening gap between two people who are growing in different directions. Another aspect of growth is reflection on the purpose of the relationship. When love is no longer enough, it often coincides with the realization that the relationship may have fulfilled its role in personal development. It may have provided lessons in patience, communication, empathy, or self-understanding, but its capacity to support further growth may be limited. Recognizing this is not about blame or failure, it is about insight and maturity. The role of growth is to illuminate both the strengths and the limitations of the relationship, allowing individuals to evaluate whether their paths forward remain compatible or whether they must continue evolving independently. Growth is a mirror that reveals not only what love has nurtured, but also what love alone cannot sustain. The role of growth is also intertwined with timing. People do not evolve on the same schedule, and even aligned growth trajectories can be misaligned temporally. One partner may reach a stage of self-realization or ambition, while the other is still navigating prior challenges. Love can provide support, but it cannot accelerate personal development or bridge the gap between differing life stages. Recognizing the temporal dimension of growth requires patience, reflection, and honesty about whether the relationship can accommodate evolving priorities without stifling either partner's development. Ultimately, understanding the role of growth is about seeing love in context. Love may inspire, comfort, and motivate, but it cannot alone ensure compatibility, alignment, or fulfillment over time. Growth is the force that shapes both individuals and the relationship itself, determining whether love can endure or whether it will coexist with divergence and unmet needs. By acknowledging the importance of growth, one gains clarity, compassion, and the courage to make conscious choices about whether to nurture the evolving bond or to honor personal evolution by stepping away. Growth teaches us that love is profound, but it must exist alongside alignment, mutual understanding, and the freedom to evolve, or it risks being a beautiful sentiment trapped in an unsustainable reality. Decision and responsibility are at the heart of realizing that love, however deep, is not always enough to sustain a relationship. When affection alone cannot bridge the gap between two people, the choice of how to move forward becomes both inevitable and profoundly difficult. Making a decision requires honesty, self-awareness, and courage. It is not simply about choosing to stay or leave. It is about acknowledging the consequences of either path, taking responsibility for your role in the relationship, and acting with integrity rather than reaction. Responsibility is inseparable from decision making because it asks you to own the impact of your choices, not only on yourself, but on your partner and the shared history you have built together. In this context, decision is not impulsive, it is deliberate, informed, and grounded in understanding rather than emotion alone. At the core of decision making is reflection. It requires stepping back from the immediacy of feelings, the pull of attachment, and the intensity of desire to examine the relationship objectively. Reflection involves asking difficult questions. Are our needs being met? Are our values aligned? Is our connection sustainable beyond the affection we feel? Reflection is not about assigning blame or diminishing love. It is about evaluating the health, functionality, and long-term viability of the bond. Through reflection, clarity emerges, allowing you to see the aspects of the relationship that love alone cannot repair, the patterns that persist despite effort, and the realistic potential for fulfillment moving forward. This clarity forms the foundation for any responsible decision. Responsibility in this context is the willingness to acknowledge your role in both the strengths and weaknesses of the relationship. It is easy to externalize fault, to tell oneself that love should have been enough or that the other person failed to meet expectations. True responsibility requires a deeper examination, how your actions, communication, and choices have shaped the dynamic. It also involves recognizing when staying in the relationship may be harmful, either by enabling stagnation, fostering resentment, or compromising personal growth. Responsibility is not about self-blame. It is about owning your part in the narrative and acting consciously rather than reacting to fear, guilt, or societal pressure. Making a responsible decision also demands courage. There is immense emotional weight in confronting the possibility that the relationship may not survive, even when love persists. Choosing to leave does not negate the value of what was shared. It acknowledges that love alone cannot create a sustainable partnership. Choosing to stay, on the other hand, requires commitment to honest communication, active effort, and perhaps a shared willingness to work through structural and emotional gaps. Either path is difficult, but courage allows you to embrace the choice consciously, rather than postponing clarity or clinging to the illusion that love will automatically resolve underlying issues. Decision and responsibility also involve compassion, both for yourself and your partner. Ending a relationship, even when necessary, requires empathy and sensitivity. Recognizing that both individuals have invested time, emotion, and hope does not make the decision easier, but it ensures that it is carried out with integrity. Similarly, taking responsibility means granting yourself compassion, acknowledging that choosing what is best for your well-being does not make you unloving or selfish. It is an act of self-respect and honesty, recognizing that relationships are complex and that love, though significant, is only one component of a thriving connection. Another dimension of decision and responsibility is accountability to the future. Every choice carries consequences, and understanding these consequences is part of responsible decision-making. Staying without addressing fundamental gaps can lead to prolonged dissatisfaction, resentment, or emotional stagnation. Leaving can bring grief, uncertainty, and the challenge of rebuilding, but it can also open space for growth, self-discovery, and the possibility of healthier connections. Responsibility requires weighing these outcomes with honesty and clarity, considering not just immediate emotions, but long-term well-being for both partners. Ultimately, decision and responsibility transform a painful realization into an opportunity for integrity and growth. When love is no longer enough, clarity and courage guide the next steps. Responsibility ensures that choices are deliberate, compassionate, and self-aware, while decision-making translates insight into action. Together, they allow you to navigate heartbreak with dignity, to honor the love that exists while acknowledging its limitations, and to embrace the next chapter with conscious intention. Decision and responsibility are not easy, but they are essential. They teach that love alone cannot define a relationship. It is the deliberate choices we make, grounded in honesty and accountability, that shape the path forward. Finding peace and clarity is the final, essential step when love is no longer enough to sustain a relationship. It is the delicate space that emerges after the storm of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion, and longing has been acknowledged and faced. This stage is not about erasing pain or pretending the heartbreak does not exist. It is about accepting reality as it is and learning to live with both the loss and the lessons that come with it. Clarity is the light that illuminates what was, what is, and what can be, while peace is the quiet strength that allows the heart to rest without resentment, regret, or fear. Together, they create the foundation upon which healing, growth, and the next chapter of life can be built. Finding clarity begins with reflection, a conscious examination of the relationship and its dynamics. It involves asking the hard questions: what was working and what was not, what needs were unmet and why, what patterns repeated, and how did both individuals contribute. Clarity does not aim to assign blame or cultivate guilt. It is an honest inventory of reality, a recognition that love alone cannot fix misalignment or fill gaps that require more than affection. Through this process, insight emerges, revealing both the value and the limitations of the connection. Clarity allows you to understand the difference between the intensity of feelings and the sustainability of a partnership. It enables you to see the truth that may have been obscured by attachment, hope, or fear, and to acknowledge it without judgment. Peace is inseparable from clarity. Once the truth is seen, the mind and heart must reconcile with it. Peace is not instant. It is cultivated gradually through acceptance, forgiveness, and the willingness to release what cannot be changed. Forgiveness, in this context, is less about absolving another and more about freeing oneself from the weight of resentment. Holding on to anger or blame prolongs suffering and prevents emotional recovery. Peace allows the heart to rest even while grief lingers. It is the recognition that the end of a relationship does not negate its significance or the love that existed. Rather, it situates it within a larger understanding of life's complexity and impermanence. Achieving peace and clarity also requires self-compassion. The end of a relationship, even when necessary, can awaken feelings of failure, inadequacy, or self-doubt. Self-compassion reminds you that experiencing heartbreak does not diminish your worth, nor does it reflect poorly on your capacity to love. It allows you to honor your emotions fully without judgment, to validate your experience, and to recognize that making difficult decisions is an act of integrity rather than weakness. This gentle attention to the self creates the space for reflection and understanding, allowing clarity to emerge naturally rather than being forced or rushed. Another aspect of finding peace and clarity is the acknowledgement of impermanence. Relationships, like life itself, are fluid, they evolve, and transform in ways that are sometimes beyond control. Recognizing this allows the mind to release attachment to what was without erasing the memory or the lessons learned. Clarity comes from seeing the arc of the relationship with honesty, understanding both its beauty and its limitations, while peace arises from accepting that some outcomes are inevitable, regardless of how much love was present. This acceptance is not passive resignation. It is an empowered acknowledgement that life continues and that personal growth, fulfillment, and new connections remain possible. Finding peace and clarity also enables intentional action moving forward. With a clear mind and a calm heart, decisions about boundaries, communication, and next steps become less reactive and more thoughtful. It allows you to honor the past without being trapped by it, to embrace change without fear, and to approach the future with openness. Clarity and peace create the conditions for meaningful healing, for self-discovery, and for the cultivation of resilience. They remind you that while love may not have been enough to sustain the relationship, the experience still holds value in shaping who you are and what you need in life. Ultimately, finding peace and clarity is a quiet triumph of the heart and mind. It is the space where grief and acceptance coexist, where lessons are internalized without bitterness, and where hope for the future can begin to flourish. It is the culmination of reflection, honesty, and self-compassion, allowing the individual to move forward with dignity and strength. Peace and clarity do not erase the past, they honor it, contextualize it, and create the possibility of a life lived fully, even beyond the limitations of a love that could no longer sustain itself. Realizing that love is no longer enough is one of life's most difficult awakenings, but it is also a profound invitation to honesty, growth, and self-awareness. It asks us to confront reality with courage, to honor our feelings while acknowledging limitations, and to take responsibility for our choices with integrity. In this space, we discover that love, while beautiful and transformative, is only one part of a complex equation that includes compatibility, communication, shared values, and mutual growth. Accepting this truth allows us to act consciously, whether that means nurturing what remains, setting boundaries, or releasing what cannot continue. Through reflection, emotional awareness, and the pursuit of clarity, we find a quiet strength that transcends heartbreak. In the end, the lesson is not that love fails, but that life and the choices we make within it demand both heart and wisdom, courage, and compassion.